Welcome to Demystifying Stakeholder Engagement. This video addresses who stakeholders are and when and how you should cultivate their involvement in your VISTA project. The term stakeholder is used very broadly, so let's take a look at the various interpretations of the word as it pertains to community engagement. First, a stakeholder is someone who benefits directly from your project, also known as a beneficiary. Beneficiaries include folks like students receiving tutoring, elderly individuals receiving food, or veterans receiving job skills. These tend to be the most obvious stakeholders to identify, and they represent some of the most important stakeholders of your project. Next, there are those who care about the project focus area, also known as your indirect beneficiaries. For example, parents might care about your youth substance abuse prevention project, but will not directly benefit from it, although their family will. There are those who care about your project focus for reasons that are value-driven and won't receive a direct or indirect benefit. Others doing work that complements your cause comprise another type of stakeholder. For example, if you are working on a project that assists veterans developing career paths, you'll want to be working closely with entities working on veterans' housing issues and veteran mental health issues. These issues are interconnected and exist on a spectrum or continuum of care. We are each other's allies and stakeholders. A final category of stakeholder is made up of people with a general interest in the overall health and vitality of the community. These stakeholders are often represented by formal institutions like local governments, education institutions, faith-based organizations, hospitals, or businesses. These institutions and associated individuals often have a vested interest in ensuring the community thrives. What do we mean by stakeholder involvement? The image here is an adaptation of the ladder of citizen participation developed by Sherry Arnstein in 1969. She defined citizen participation as the redistribution of power that enables the community to be deliberately included in the future. And she interpreted various levels of participation as contributing to that goal. The first step of the ladder represents information giving. This occurs throughout all levels of participation and simply represents our efforts to be transparent with stakeholders, sharing details about the project need, theory of change, and strategy for implementation. The next step is consult, which represents our efforts to create dialogue and solicit input from stakeholders and begin to see them as resources. The next step of the ladder is to involve the community in making decisions with us. When we decide together, we ask our stakeholders to assume some power in our projects and provide direction, without asking them to assume responsibility for the implementation and success of the project. When our stakeholders are ready to begin transferring ownership, we collaborate together, which represents the next step on the ladder. Collaborating occurs when we engage our stakeholders in the roles and responsibilities necessary to complete our work. They become responsible and accountable to the success of the project through their direct efforts and level of involvement. When the ladder is navigated well, and our stakeholders are engaged properly, we will reach the final step in the ladder, citizen empowerment. Citizen empowerment represents seeing stakeholders assume ownership and leadership of a project. When we reach this level, we can feel confident that capacity has been built and sustainability is achievable. We can't simply involve our stakeholders. We have to engage our stakeholders. So what does stakeholder engagement look like? Stakeholder engagement is about engaging the right stakeholders at the right time in the right way. When we engage with the right stakeholders at the right time and in the right way, we ensure that our community understands the need being addressed, agrees with the solution being proposed, and is committed to doing the work required to implement it. First, community engagement requires the community's needs to be both understood and agreed upon. Years ago, a VISTA leader was placed in a rural area where teen pregnancy rates were very high. Despite her best efforts, she just couldn't get stakeholders engaged with her prevention programs. After a little investigating, she discovered that while the members of the community were generally aware of teen pregnancy, they didn't agree that it was a problem, and therefore didn't see reducing it as a need. For them, it was simply the way of things and what they had experienced growing up. Now, that doesn't mean the VISTA just packed up shop and walked away. It simply meant that she needed to engage with stakeholders differently and focus initially on providing information instead of implementing programs. This VISTA needed to develop an outreach campaign to raise awareness around why teen pregnancy was a problem before attempting to solve the problem. Once enough people understood the consequences of teen pregnancy in their community, they were ready to mobilize and explore solutions. Next, our proposed solution to the problem must be agreed upon by our stakeholders, and our efforts in this regard tend to fall flat for two reasons. Often we have a tendency to lead with solutions. We believe that we know better than the community and therefore don't take the time to consult or decide together. This is where we attempt to fix rather than serve. Next, we assume that a solution that was agreed upon once will always be relevant and neglect to include our stakeholders in ongoing assessment and feedback. In all these cases, we are not truly acting together. In another example, a VISTA member served at a youth center designed and governed by a youth board. His role was to assist the youth stakeholders in building the financial and programmatic capacity of their youth center, and it was really hard to get them involved, no less get them to assume responsibility. This continued for months, until he decided to conduct focus groups with youth around the community to get their ideas and suggestions about what to do. It turned out that the youth who were originally invested in the center had graduated high school and moved on. The emerging youth in the community didn't want a youth center. They wanted opportunities to participate in larger community events that were traditionally not open to young people. Once he realized he was working on the wrong solution, the VISTA member changed course and had no problem getting youth involved. Closing the youth center was the right thing to do, and the VISTA recognized, with the help of the stakeholders, that their needs had changed. Finally, stakeholders themselves must be committed to implementing and sustaining the solution. Many years ago, the YWCA in Helena, Montana, announced it was going to close its doors because the building needed a new boiler. The board of directors, operating without citizen empowerment and therefore lacking a connection to their stakeholders, decided there was no way to secure the resources needed to update the building and thought it best to dissolve. Many community members saw this as a problem because the YWCA was the only option for transitional housing in the area, so they decided to step up. These individuals secured positions on the board, assumed leadership roles, and conducted outreach to raise awareness of their concerns. As a result, they were able to secure the funds necessary to fix the building and hire an executive director who committed to steward the organization forward under the direction of local stakeholders. Today, the YWCA is thriving, and that new boiler is still working nearly a decade later, due to the efforts of community stakeholders. Each of these stories include people with great intentions who simply didn't understand how to properly engage stakeholders, and their work was harder than it needed to be as a result. The good news is, there are many options to assist us in avoiding these traps and succeeding in our efforts. We should always begin by identifying our project beneficiaries as our stakeholders, as these are often the people who have the most to contribute to our work. As mentioned earlier, we can also identify indirect beneficiaries and others in the community who have a stake or interest in our work, which we'll discuss here. There are a variety of ways to identify stakeholders, and we're going to use a simple model that separates our stakeholders into formal and informal groups. First, we have our formal stakeholders. Formal stakeholders generally represent the major institutions in our community, those who have an interest in the overall health and wellness of the community, or those who may be working on the same issues and causes we are addressing. These stakeholders represent our ability to connect with existing systems and structures and include local governments like city councils or county commissions, public service entities such as hospitals, emergency services, law enforcement, or state agencies, schools including public, private, alternative, and institutions of higher education, churches, mosques, and other faith-based organizations, and businesses, including corporations and small businesses, and for our purposes, other nonprofit organizations. Next, we have our informal stakeholders, represented by loosely affiliated structures and entities that allow us access to individual residents. Connecting with stakeholders through these mechanisms allow us to target our efforts and generally identify those who are already involved in the community in some way and tend to be hungry to take on more. These might include parent-teacher organizations and other groups with which people affiliate based on a portion of their identity, such as parent. Neighborhood associations or other entities that engage individuals based upon geography and location. Service and advocacy groups that engage individuals around a cause or a value. Sports teams and similar cohorts that engage individuals around activity or collegiality. and educational programs and initiatives that engage individuals around activities that lead to personal development or growth. The next part of your stakeholder identification process is to take the time to sit down and think critically about who you would like to be involved in your project in order to ensure you are moving towards citizen empowerment and sustainability. First, you'll want to consider demographics. Think about what your community looks like and do your best to mirror it as wholly as possible. What religions, nationalities, and ethnicities are represented? What income levels? What age groups? Remember that diversity is a strength, and we stand to gain the most when we work with people with different backgrounds. So try your best to think broadly and be inclusive when you generate this list. Next, think about the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to support your project long-term. Ask yourself, what talents and resources do you need from stakeholders? What expertise and experience would benefit your project? Are there specific certifications or skills that would be helpful for you to access? Thinking this through will help you build the right team to inform and carry the work forward. In addition to knowledge, skills, and abilities, you'll also want to think about stakeholder affiliations that can benefit your project. Ask yourself, what connections will aid you in creating sustainability? What sectors would you like represented and why? Do other entities exist that might be willing to share the responsibility of sustainability with you? Finally, think through what kind of commitment you seek from your stakeholders. Do you need them to contribute time, money? What actions do you need them to perform? Do you need them weekly, monthly, quarterly? Knowing exactly what you want and need will greatly increase your likelihood of getting it. Here are 3 strategies you can use to seek out and engage potential stakeholders. The first strategy is concentric circle outreach. Concentric circle outreach represents the times when you're talking with people you already know and have existing relationships with. This can include neighbors, friends, people who work with your project regularly, organizational partners, nonprofit partners, and others you have regular access to. This approach allows you to leverage your existing relationships to identify individuals to assist in your project. The next strategy is broad-based outreach. Broad-based outreach encompasses wide-reaching strategies, things like posters, flyers, letters to the editor, public service announcements, and Facebook events. Broad-based strategies are generally used when we're trying to engage stakeholders in large numbers of major events, or when we're trying to bring new stakeholders into the fold. Broad-based outreach is good for raising awareness, but doesn't usually inspire people to get very involved. So it's not something that should be used as a standalone strategy. You'll be best served to think about this as a marketing function to assist you in your stakeholder engagement plan. Finally, targeted outreach can have the greatest impact. Targeted outreach represents our willingness to use all our resources to identify the specific stakeholders we need and our efforts to go out and find those people. Targeted outreach requires us to get out there and shake hands, answer questions, and make direct asks of people. You'll know who to target by using the lists you generated when thinking through your formal and informal stakeholder opportunities, as well as the information you identified when thinking through your demographics, knowledge, skills, abilities, affiliations, and commitments required to sustain your project. Targeted strategies require a willingness to put time into a relationship building, and it's important to take care and ensure the relationship is being built between the project and stakeholder, not you and the stakeholder. Let's review both our role and the stakeholder's role at each participation goal. The important thing to understand is that when we engage stakeholders with different goals, we also create an opportunity to maximize their impact and move towards citizen empowerment. One thing to note is that the latter doesn't include the assessment you'll want to do up front, which really does involve stakeholders informing you. During any assessment, your job is to ask questions and listen closely. You'll want to know how they feel, what they think, what their experience has been, and what would make it better. You'll also ask them to direct you to others for additional information. The Inform goal aims to raise stakeholder awareness. You'll provide them with information and transparency about the work you are doing and what they can expect. Also, you are providing them with the training and talking points necessary to engage the broader community and to carry the message and share their perspective with those they share an affiliation with. With this information, stakeholders can act as advocates and informers themselves. Next, we move to the Consulting goal. where you begin to engage your stakeholders further and ensure that resources used and strategies developed are in line with their needs and interests. This is where our stakeholders act as advisors, and we begin collaborating, representing the consultation stage of the ladder. Next comes involvement and decision-making with the group. This level is where you begin to foster stakeholders' ability to make decisions about your shared work. At this level, we continue to collaborate, and our stakeholders begin to act as deciders. Collaboration is next, and this is where you will rely on the skills and talents of your stakeholders in order to get much of the work done and allow them to take the lead with direct service where possible. Remember, they should be the ones building relationships, delivering services, and advocating, because they'll remain when you or your project go. At this step, our stakeholders act as contributors, and we begin empowering. Finally, empowered stakeholders will take the lead in activities such as seeking out feedback and engaging in evaluation with you. They participate directly and hear things for themselves. Remember, oftentimes as Vistas, we are just visitors in these communities, and we may miss something important that a stakeholder would hear and understand. Additionally, including stakeholders in the process of evaluation means they are no longer the ones giving feedback. They are now the ones receiving it. This changes the dynamic and puts them in a position of responsibility. Our final piece will be to identify the right ways to engage stakeholders, which really encompasses our willingness to meet our stakeholders on a personal level in order to empower them in ways that work for them. This is accomplished by putting stakeholders in the right role, utilizing the right processes to guide their work, and showing them respect throughout their engagement with us. Placing stakeholders in the right role is not just a matter of aligning with the participation goals on the ladder. It is also about aligning the level of experience and competency of our stakeholders, recognizing that this is not just a community development process, it is also a personal development process. We want to ensure that new stakeholders have an opportunity to be gently introduced to our organization and project in ways that don't feel overwhelming or outside of their capacity, while also ensuring that our veteran stakeholders have the opportunity to take on real responsibilities and assume leadership. The key here is to deliberately design your stakeholder engagement opportunities in ways that allow stakeholders to move through the developmental process towards citizen empowerment. To achieve this, you will need episodic entry roles, recurrent roles, and leadership roles, all of which align with both developmental needs and the various steps of the ladder of participation. Episodic entry roles are designed for individuals who are just becoming involved with your project. You want to make sure these people have an opportunity to get involved incrementally so they can build a relationship with your project and get comfortable with participating. This can be done through episodic volunteer engagements, short-term advocacy engagements, participation in focus groups, or survey completion. Think small bites, and include both direct and indirect opportunities that do not include high levels of responsibility. View this as an opportunity to inform new stakeholders, listen to their needs, and develop their participation. Once a stakeholder has been introduced to your work in an episodic manner, you will want to encourage them to take on a more long-term commitment by assuming a reoccurring role, which is where we hope to see responsibility and ownership increase. This can be a volunteer or advocacy role, an outreach role, or even an advisory role. You'll want to make sure the individual taking on the role has the right skills, talents, and commitments to succeed. At this stage, you will also want to begin inviting your stakeholders to collaborate and engage in problem-solving. Successfully engaging our recurrent stakeholders in problem-solving is the key to preparing them for leadership roles. Leadership roles are how we create and demonstrate the long-term sustainability of our projects and are marked by transferring decision-making. When we engage our recurrent stakeholders in problem-solving, we inherently begin to build their knowledge and abilities to make sound decisions. Decision-making requires careful thought and execution, and is the point where our individual identities begin to merge with the identity of our project and organizations. Stakeholders in leadership positions with decision-making responsibilities represent citizen empowerment and are a strong indicator of sustainability. Here is a chart of just some of the tools that are available to you as you navigate stakeholder involvement through the ladder of participation. This chart is organized to give you a sense of where things like appreciative inquiry, logic models, and SMART goals can be used to both organize your work and support your intention of generating citizen empowerment. Some of these concepts may be known to you, others might not, but rest assured, There are ample resources available to you that will aid you in understanding and utilizing these tools as needed, many of which you will learn about through this course. Here are the elements of respect in stakeholders' engagement. First, we need to validate our stakeholders. This means we create a listening space and allow them to inform us of their experiences, opinions, and ideas. Accomplishing this requires us to practice active and reflective listening, where we prioritize the speaker and take care to ask questions, summarize our interpretation, and reflect understanding. When we do this well, we also allow ourselves an opportunity to express empathy, which is the key to validation. Now, empathy is not pity. It is identifying with the underlying emotion attached to an experience and recognizing that we have also experienced that emotion. When speaking with a stakeholder who has experienced something you may not have experienced, you can simply say, "Wow, that must have been really scary," or "That must have been very difficult." That small gesture validates the experience of others and make them feel heard. Next, we strive to include our stakeholders. This means that we actively involve our stakeholders, and more importantly, we actively involve their voice. We invite them to events and ensure the organization and events are accessible. We welcome them, introduce them, and afford them a sense of belonging. Accomplishing this requires us to exercise cultural competency. In this context, cultural competency means that you and your organization have taken the time to better understand the culture you are working in and around, and have an awareness of your own culture's bias and beliefs, so that you can create a cooperative environment that allows you to leverage diverse strengths. Cultural competency also asks that we recognize intersectionality and understand that each of us is a unique individual with multiple aspects of identity, which will impact how we relate, interact, and include each other. Next, we provide our stakeholders with the recognition they deserve for getting involved. We allow them to show up how they need to, when they can, and express gratitude and enthusiasm around their participation. Recognition can be as simple as a pat on the back and a thank you, or it can be a letter to the editor recognizing a stakeholder's contributions by name. There are literally thousands of recognition strategies that can be used, and my recommendation is to utilize as many of them as possible. This will keep your approach fresh and ensure that your efforts feel authentic. Finally, we incorporate our stakeholders. We document their ideas and suggestions and tell them how they're being used. We prepare for them, support their needs, and follow up with them as needed. This is done by creating enough time to plan for our stakeholders' time and producing the resources they need to participate actively. Incorporating also requires us to loop close, which helps our stakeholders feel that their time spent on your project is valuable. Loop closing is simple. If I ask for your feedback, I will return to you and let you know how it was used. If I ask for you to complete a portion of a task, I will let you know how it was used and what the final product was. If I say I will call you by the end of the week, I do. Loop closing is about accountability and demonstrating our stakeholders' value along with the results of their efforts. These simple steps will go a long way towards generating the trust of your stakeholders and encouraging their engagement. Remember, successful stakeholder engagement is about engaging the right stakeholders at the right time and in the right way. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for your service.